Those 6 words. That was all it took. Daniel Mercer was standing at his kitchen window, the weight of a heavy ceramic mug in his hand and the bitter taste of a forgotten day on his tongue. It was a Tuesday, or perhaps a Wednesday. The days had a habit of bleeding into one another lately, and he was engaged in the solitary, quiet ritual of being a father. He was watching his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, chase fireflies in the backyard. It was a scene that was completely harmless, completely ordinary, and so deeply ingrained in the fabric of his suburban existence that he didn't realize he was holding his breath. The coffee in his mug had been cold for precisely 20 minutes. Daniel knew this with the clinical accuracy of a man whose life was governed by timestamps and revision requests. He had poured it at 7:14 p.m., promising himself a quick caffeine fix while he checked the final emails from a particularly demanding client in Denver. But a minor software glitch had turned into a 45-minute deep dive into lines of code, and by the time he emerged from the digital fog, the mug was stone cold. He drank it anyway. That was the kind of man Daniel Mercer had become. Practical, unsentimental, the kind of man who drank cold coffee, acknowledged its bitterness, and called it fine. Through the glass of the kitchen window, the world looked soft. Lily was spinning in the grass, her arms outstretched like the wings of a clumsy bird. She was trying to catch the flickering yellow lights of the fireflies with her bare hands, failing gloriously and remaining completely unbothered by her failure. At 8 years old, she still moved through the world as if it had been custom-built for her comfort. Daniel watched her and felt that particular, sharp ache known only to parents, the realization that this quality of effortless joy was temporary. He knew the world would eventually teach her about gravity, about disappointment, and about the weight of expectations. He wanted to slow the clock, to keep her in that backyard forever, even knowing that he couldn't. He was thinking of his daughter, the cooling evening, and the quiet rhythm of Maple Creek Drive. He was absolutely not thinking about the moving truck. The rumble broke through the silence at 7:51 p.m. Daniel noted the time on the microwave clock out of habit as a large, professional moving van pulled up directly across the street. It was a massive vehicle, an intruder in the quiet cul-de-sac. For movers hopped out, moving with the efficient, synchronized silence of people who were paid by the job rather than the hour. Daniel watched them in the way one registers the weather. It was background information, a data point that required no immediate action. Then, she stepped off the ramp. She wore a charcoal blazer, a crisp white blouse, and dark trousers that looked sharp enough to cut paper. Even from across the street, Daniel could see the glint of high heels on the asphalt. She had a phone pressed to her ear, not in the distracted way of someone making small talk, but with the intensity of a general directing a campaign from a distance. With a single, wordless gesture of her free hand, she redirected a mover who had angled a sofa incorrectly. The man adjusted his path immediately, responding to her presence without a second thought. Daniel stared. He knew he was staring, yet his brain refused to send the signal to look away. There was something about the way she moved, a specific, undeniable presence. It wasn't just beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful in a sharp, architectural way. It was the aura of someone who had decided long ago that the world could either accommodate her or get out of the way. And, looking at her, Daniel got the distinct impression that the world had mostly chosen to get out of the way. She ended her call with a clean stop. No lingering goodbyes, no social wind down, just done. She tucked the phone into her blazer pocket and stood for a moment, surveying the street. She looked at the houses, the neatly trimmed lawns, the parked cars, and the ancient oak tree on the corner that Mrs. Huang always complained about. Her gaze was methodical, unhurried, and entirely assessing. And then, her eyes stopped. They landed directly on him. Daniel stood frozen behind the glass of his kitchen window. A reasonable man, a man with a shred of social dignity, would have stepped back immediately. He should have turned away, pretended to be interested in the sink, or vanished into the shadows of the hallway. But he didn't. He held her gaze for one long, agonizing beat. Then, she spoke. Her voice wasn't a shout, but it was projected with the clarity of a woman accustomed to running boardrooms. It carried easily across the still evening air, through the glass, and straight into his chest. If you want to look, just ask. The coffee mug jerked in Daniel's hand. It wasn't a mere flinch. It was a full, involuntary spasm. The cold liquid splashed over the rim, hitting the counter, and soaking into the sleeve of his shirt. He felt the chill of it on his wrist. But even then, he didn't look away for a full 3 seconds, 3 seconds longer than any man with a sense of self-preservation should have held eye contact. After being caught, finally, he stumbled back from the window, his heart doing something loud and unnecessary against his ribs. He felt a heat rising in his neck that he hadn't experienced in years. "Dad!" The back door burst open, and Lily thundered in. Her hands were cupped together, a faint, rhythmic glow pulsing between her small fingers. Her face was incandescent with triumph. "I caught 2. Can we keep them? Just overnight? I'll let them go in the morning, I promise." Daniel took a breath, forcing his voice to descend into a register of normalcy. He was proud of how steady he sounded when he spoke. "I'll get a jar, Lil. Cabinet under the island. The one with the lid." As Lily scrambled toward the cabinet, Daniel stood at the counter, the wet fabric of his sleeve clinging to his skin. He looked at the window he had just retreated from and felt a strange, heavy sensation in the air. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something more primal, like the shift in atmospheric pressure that precedes a massive storm. It was the sudden, jarring awareness that the geography of his life had just shifted. He told himself he was being dramatic. He told himself he would go over the next day, introduce himself like a normal neighbor, and apologize for the staring. It would be a 30-second interaction, a polite exchange of names, and then he would go back to his quiet, managed, smaller version of himself. He believed this completely. He was completely wrong. Daniel looked down at the spilled coffee on the counter. His life had been a series of controlled variables for 3 years. Work, Lily, sleep, repeat. It was a life that was safe, a life that didn't ask much of him, and a life that didn't hurt. But as he wiped away the mess, his eyes kept drifting back to the darkened pane of glass. Across the street, the lights of the new neighbor's house were flickering on, one by one, carving a defiant space in the dark. His entire careful, quiet, perfectly managed life had just cracked straight down the middle, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Mercer wasn't sure if he wanted to fix it. He stood in the quiet of his kitchen, listening to Lily rattle the glass jar, and realized that the silence of Maple Creek Drive would never sound the same again. The storm had arrived, charcoal blazed and unbothered, and it had started with 6 simple words. Daniel did not go over the next day. He told himself he was busy, genuinely, objectively busy. The Denver client had returned with 3 more urgent revisions that required him to squint at his dual monitors for 6 hours straight. Lily had a dentist appointment at 2 p.m. There were groceries to order, a conference call at 4 p.m., and a leak in the guest bathroom that required his immediate, if somewhat amateur, attention. There was simply no reasonable window of time in which to cross the street and do what exactly? Say, "Hello, I'm the man you caught staring at you through glass. Welcome to the neighborhood. Sorry about the involuntary coffee spill." No, the timing was wrong. He would go tomorrow. He didn't go tomorrow, either. What he did instead, entirely without meaning to, was notice things. It wasn't stalking. It was an awareness of his immediate environment, an adjustment to the atmospheric conditions of Maple Creek Drive. He noticed her lights were on before 6 a.m. every morning. When he came downstairs to start his own coffee, he would see the warm yellow rectangle of her upper floor window, someone already at work, already commanding the day before the sun had even cleared the horizon. He noticed the dog. She had a golden retriever, a big, exuberant creature named Scout. She walked him at 7:30 sharp every morning. The dog moved with the cheerful, oblivious confidence of a creature who believed the world was fundamentally generous. Victoria, however, did not look like a woman who had bought a dog because she wanted a companion. She looked like a woman who had bought a dog because a therapist or a life coach had told her she needed a lifestyle anchor. and she had decided to commit to the decision with the same terrifying efficiency she applied to everything else. He noticed the deliveries. They weren't Amazon boxes. They were thick, heavy envelopes with law firm return addresses. She signed for them quickly, her posture rigid, and disappeared inside without reading them in the doorway the way most people did. She signed for things she was already expecting, things she had already mentally filed away. He was absolutely watching her, and he knew it, and he continued to tell himself otherwise because that was easier than examining what it meant for a man who had spent 3 years being fine to suddenly be so captivated by a stranger's shadow. The first real conversation happened because of the dog, which felt, in retrospect, like the universe operating with a wicked sense of humor. It was Saturday morning. Daniel was finally doing the oil change he'd pushed back twice already. He was lying under his car in the driveway, rag in hand, working by feel in the way you do when you've performed a task so many times. Your hands remember the steps without instructions. He was in his happy place, the quiet, mechanical world of torque and grease, when he heard it. The rapid-fire click of large paws on asphalt closing fast. A sharp whistle. Then, the sound of paws stopping abruptly right next to his head. Daniel rolled out from under the car, blinking against the sudden sunlight. Scout was standing 2 feet away, head cocked, examining Daniel with the focused curiosity of an animal who had decided this was the most interesting thing to happen all week. Up close, the dog was enormous and deeply gentle-looking. Victoria Calloway was at the far end of the block. She had a leash in her hand, but she wasn't running. She never seemed to run. She walked toward him with a purposeful stride that covered ground efficiently without appearing rushed. Scout, her voice carried, even, direct, the voice of a woman accustomed to being listened to. Come. Scout looked at her. He looked at Daniel. Then, with a sigh of satisfaction, the dog sat down right next to Daniel's shoulder. Daniel sat up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He's not bothering me, he said, his voice a little gruffer than intended. She reached them in another 15 seconds. With a single practiced motion, she clipped the leash back to Scout's collar. The dog immediately leaned his full weight against her leg. He does this, she said, her eyes sweeping over Daniel, then the car, then the tools spread across the driveway. He decides someone is trustworthy and anchors himself. Smart dog, Daniel noted. Expensive dog, she corrected, a hint of something dry and self-deprecating in her tone. I bought him during a professionally catastrophic quarter, believing he would make things simpler. He has not simplified a single thing in 2 years. She looked at the car again. Oil change. Overdue oil change, judging by the color of that rag. Daniel felt a strange surge of heat. I've been busy. You work from home, she stated, more than asked. Software consulting? Flexible enough to manage school schedules. How do you? Lily, she said, and the sound of his daughter's name in her mouth startled him. She introduced herself twice. She told me her father reads to her every night, even when he's tired, that he makes the best French toast in the neighborhood and once cried at the end of Charlotte's Web, but claimed it was allergies. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. She is 8 years old and a social liability, he muttered. This time, Victoria actually smiled. It was small and quick, gone almost before it arrived, but it was real. She sounds like someone who pays attention. Victoria said. She pays too much attention. There's no such thing. She said it without thinking, the way people say things. They've thought many times before. She looked at him again, that direct, assessing look that felt like being read rather than seen. The oil filter, she noted, pointing a slim finger toward his hand. You're holding it upside down. Daniel looked down. She was right. He had been holding the new filter upside down for the better part of 10 minutes. Behind him, he heard her laugh, brief, dry, and genuinely amused, and then the sound of her walking away, Scout's nails clicking against the asphalt. The shift from neighborly awareness to something else happened on a Thursday night. Lily was asleep. It was 9:14 p.m. Daniel was on the back porch with a book, trying to settle into the quiet that usually brought him peace, but tonight felt strangely thin. Then he heard it, sharp and clear from across the street, the unmistakable sound of glass hitting tile and shattering. He was on his feet before the sound finished echoing. He didn't think about it. He didn't weigh the social implications. He saw the light in her kitchen, saw a shadow moving fast, and he moved. He crossed the street and knocked on her front door. She opened it in 11 seconds. She was still in her blazer. Did the woman ever wear pajamas? But her right hand was wrapped in a bloody paper towel. She was holding it away from her body with the brisk practicality of a woman categorizing a minor inconvenience. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "It was a glass. I was moving too fast." "You're bleeding through the towel, Victoria." "It's worse than fine." He used her name for the first time, and something shifted in her face, something quick and unguarded. "Do you have a first aid kit?" She stepped back, a silent invitation. Hall closet. Second shelf. The kit was exactly where she said. It was organized and well-stocked, the kit of someone who planned for emergencies. He brought it to the kitchen island, and she sat across from him, holding out her hand with a look of significant, conscious patience. Daniel unwrapped the towel. The cut was clean, not deep, but it was bleeding. Steadily, he began to clean it methodically. Victoria held perfectly still, watching his hands. "You're good at this," she remarked. "Lily made me take a first aid course with her last spring. She was deeply invested in my preparedness." Something moved across Victoria's face. Tenderness? It was gone too fast to be. "Sure. She worries about you. She supervises me," Daniel corrected, pressing a sterile pad to the cut. "There's a difference." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She's lucky. I'm the lucky one." He looked up, and for a moment, the air in the kitchen felt heavy again. They were close. Close enough that he could see the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the professional mask resting just slightly out of place. "You didn't have to come over," she said. "I heard the glass. Most people would assume it was nothing." "Most people," he said carefully, "wouldn't have been on their porch at 9 at night, not reading their book." Her eyes sharpened. "Excuse me. I had a book. I wasn't reading it." He stood up, snapping the kit closed. "It happens. Lock your door when I leave, Victoria, and get some sleep." He walked back across the street in the dark, feeling the cool evening air on his face. He sat back down on his porch and opened his book, but the words were completely invisible. Across the street, Victoria's kitchen light stayed on until midnight. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel didn't mind being kept awake. He sat there, thinking about the small truths they had traded, the crying at children's books, the upside-down oil filters, the supervision of an 8-year-old. He looked at the fence between their backyards, the sturdy wooden slats that marked where his life ended and hers began, and noticed a latch that had been rattling in the wind for weeks. It was broken, not completely, but enough that the gate didn't quite stay shut. He could fix it, he thought, or he could leave it. He decided, for now, to leave it. Some things were better left unlatched. The shift in the atmosphere of Maple Creek Drive was subtle at first, like the slow turning of a leaf from green to gold. The silence between Daniel's house and Victoria's was no longer the silence of two strangers, but the waited, expectant quiet of two people who had shared a small, bloody moment over a kitchen island. The bandage remained on Victoria's hand for 4 days. Daniel knew this because Scout made a habit of escaping every 48 hours. It was the same routine. The rapid-fire click of paws, the failed whistle, and Scout arriving at Daniel's side like a dog returning to a place he had already decided was home. On Wednesday morning, Daniel was crouched in his front yard, working on a section of lawn edging that had been bothering his sense of order. Victoria followed the dog, her stride as purposeful as ever, though she looked less like a corporate general and more like a woman losing an argument with a four-legged creature. "He likes your yard," she said, stopping at the edge of his property. "He's communicating that your landscaping choices were correct." Daniel looked up. The bandage on her right hand was clean and changed, but still there. "How's the hand?" "Fine," she said, with that conclusive tone that invited no further questioning. Then she paused. Her eyes drifted to where Lily was helping Mrs. Huang pull weeds 3 houses down. "There's a farmer's market on Elm this Saturday. Lily mentioned she's never been." Daniel straightened up, wiping dirt from his knees. "Lily mentions a lot of things to people. She's a fountain of unsolicited information. 8:45, Victoria said, already turning to lead Scout away. Bring containers. Lily said she intends to negotiate for jam. Saturday morning arrived with a crispness that felt like a fresh start. At 8:43, Daniel and Lily were at Victoria's door. Lily was clutching a canvas bag filled with reusable jars, her face set in a mask of professional gravity. When Victoria opened the door, she looked at Lily first, then at Daniel, and there was a softness in the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. The farmer's market was 2 hours of unexpectedly complicated ease. It was complicated because Daniel was constantly, specifically aware of Victoria beside him. He watched how she moved through the crowd. Efficient, yes, but also how she slowed her pace for Lily without making it obvious. He saw her taste a sample of artisanal apple cider vinegar, make a face of genuine, involuntary disgust, and then buy a bottle anyway because the vendor was an 80-year-old man who looked like he'd put his soul into the harvest. Lily moved between them like a small planet with its own gravitational pull. She asked Victoria questions with the relentless curiosity of a child who had decided this person was a puzzle worth solving. Are you married? Lily asked, while they were waiting for a bundle of carrots. Lily, Daniel warned softly. No, Victoria answered. Simple. No weight on it. No deflection. My dad's not married either, Lily added, swinging her bag of jars. He was. But then he wasn't. He says it made him sad for a long time, but now he's okay. The silence that landed between the three of them lasted approximately 2 seconds and felt considerably longer. Daniel looked at the pavement, feeling the old, familiar weight of his history. She's right, Victoria said, looking at Daniel. True things are worth saying. Walking back, Lily ran ahead with Scout, Victoria having handed over the leash. With a surprising amount of trust, Daniel and Victoria fell into a pace that was deliberate. She's extraordinary, Victoria said quietly. She makes everything easier and harder at the same time. That's what love does, Daniel replied. He looked at her sideways. And she was right. The divorce, it did make me sad for a long time. But not in the way people expect. It wasn't rage. It was more like discovering I'd been living in a smaller version of myself for so long that I didn't know what the full-sized version looked like anymore. Victoria stopped walking for a split second, then resumed. I know that feeling, she said, her voice flat and certain. The smaller version is safer. It has fewer edges for the world to catch on. They reached her door, and Lily hugged Scout goodbye as if they were parting for years. Victoria looked at Daniel, her gaze level and unarmored. Same time in 2 weeks. Same time, Daniel agreed. But the full-sized version of Daniel's life was tested sooner than 2 weeks. The shadow arrived on a Thursday evening. Daniel was pulling into his driveway after picking Lily up from art class. He saw the car immediately. It was a dark, expensive sedan parked ostentatiously in front of Victoria's house. A man was standing on her front step, tall, well-dressed in the way that screamed of money spent to be noticed. He had broad shoulders and a posture that suggested he owned the air he breathed. Victoria was in the doorway. She wasn't letting him in. Her posture had changed. It was the first time Daniel had seen her look wary. Not afraid. Exactly, but guarded with a deep, bodily memory of conflict. Lily, Daniel said, his voice low. Go inside. Start your homework. Is she okay, Dad? Lily asked, her eyes wide as she looked across the street. Go inside, Lil. Daniel got out of the car. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He stood in his driveway and watched, refusing to pretend he wasn't there. He heard fragments of the man's voice, smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that made pressure sound like reason. Vic, come on. You left so fast. There are things we still need to. We have nothing we need, Ryan. Victoria's voice was sharp, a blade of ice. You're being unreasonable. There it was. The word. Unreasonable. A tool designed to make a person doubt their own reality. Daniel watched Victoria's jaw tighten. Her hand, the one he had bandaged, gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles turned white. She wasn't going to ask for help. She didn't know how. So he didn't make her ask. Daniel walked across the street. He didn't perform a role. He just moved with the same directness she herself used. He stepped onto the walk and looked at the man named Ryan. "Hey," Daniel said evenly. "Everything good over here?" Ryan turned. Up close, he was handsome in a way that felt manufactured. He looked Daniel up and down with a quick, calculating sneer. "Private conversation, pal." "Sure," Daniel said, his voice remaining calm. He didn't even look at Ryan. Again, he looked only at Victoria. "Victoria, you need anything?" The silence was taut, a wire stretched to the breaking point. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reclaim the space. "She's fine." "Who are?" "I'm asking her," Daniel said, his eyes locked on Victoria's. "Not you." A flicker of something passed over Victoria's face, not weakness, but a profound, startling relief. She took a breath and straightened her shoulders. "I'm fine, Daniel. And we're done here, Ryan. Don't come back." Ryan's expression shifted from wounded romantic to something colder and much uglier. He looked at the suburban street, then back at Daniel. "You moved to the suburbs and found yourself a Boy Scout? This is what you left for?" "Leave," Victoria said. Ryan left, but he did it slowly, performing his dignity. He got into his expensive car and pulled away with a screech of tires that felt like a child's tantrum. Neither Daniel nor Victoria spoke for a long moment. Scout appeared at Victoria's side, leaning his weight against her. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice slightly rough. "I know. I had it handled." "I know that too." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. "Who is he?" Victoria exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "Someone I spent 2 years trying to make work. Someone who only came here because I'm no longer making it easy for him to control the story." Daniel didn't push for details. He didn't offer an opinion. He simply nodded. "Okay. You're not going to ask for the whole story?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "You'll tell me when you want to," Daniel said. "I'm not going anywhere." Victoria looked away, her hand stroking Scout's head. "Don't make promises like that casually." "I don't," Daniel said. "Ask Lily. I'm boring on purpose. I do what I say I'll do." For a moment, Victoria's face broke open. It was a door briefly ajar, showing a woman who was tired of being the general, tired of being the only one holding the line. "Go be with your daughter, Daniel." "Lock your door," he said. "You always say that. And you never argue with it." He walked back across the street. Inside, Lily was at the kitchen table, her worksheet in front of her, but she wasn't writing. She looked up at him as he set his keys on the counter. "She okay?" "She's okay, Lil." Lily nodded and went back to her work. Then, quietly, "You like her, Dad?" Daniel opened the refrigerator and stared into it, the hum of the appliance filling the room. He thought about the charcoal blazer, the apple cider vinegar, and the way she had looked when the shadow of Ryan had finally vanished. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I do." Lily didn't tease him. She didn't laugh. She just kept writing. "Good," she said, softly. "She needs someone who shows up." Daniel sat at the table and watched his daughter. Across the street, Victoria's front light stayed on, but for the first time, the shadow on Maple Creek Drive felt less like a threat and more like a memory being outgrown. The full-sized version of Daniel Mercer was finally standing up, and he realized he wasn't just doing it for Lily anymore. He was doing it for the woman who told him that if he wanted to look, he should just ask. 3 weeks after Ryan's visit, Victoria stopped locking her front door before 10. Daniel noticed because the rhythm of Maple Creek Drive had changed. It was no longer a series of isolated events, but a shared composition. Scout started appearing at the fence line earlier in the evenings, not because he had escaped, but because he was waiting. He would put his nose through the slats, a silent sentinel, until Victoria appeared 5 minutes later with 2 mugs of coffee. She would hand one over the fence without asking if he wanted it. She knew he did. They had learned each other's details without making a project of it. Daniel knew she worked through lunch every day and regretted it by 3. He knew the particular silence that meant she'd had a difficult call, not an angry silence, but a compressed one, like a person holding their professional face in place. With sheer effort, Victoria knew Daniel made Lily's lunch the night before, because he refused to let his daughter inherit his morning grogginess. She knew he was rebuilding a relationship with his brother in Cincinnati that had gone quiet during the divorce, and that the Sunday evening calls were getting longer and easier. The latch on the fence gate stayed broken through the end of August. Nobody mentioned it again, but nobody needed to. Scout used the gap freely now, moving between the 2 yards with the sovereign confidence of an animal who had decided. The fence was a mere formality, a suggestion rather than a rule. Lily followed him most afternoons after school, her backpack thumping against her shoulders as she crossed the threshold into Victoria's kitchen. She would do her homework at the island while Victoria worked at the other end with her laptop and her one sugar coffee. They existed in a parallel quiet, a shared frequency of focus that Daniel, watching from his own window, found almost unbearable in its beauty. He and Victoria had not officially talked about what had shifted on the porch step after the block party. They hadn't needed to. Something had been named, not in words, but in the held hand and the shared silence. But Daniel was a man who had learned that things often felt real before they were stable. He knew that warmth was not the same as readiness. So he watched, he showed up, and he let the air between them breathe. Victoria was the one who finally broke the equilibrium. It was a Sunday morning in September, the kind of morning where the air smells of impending autumn and wood smoke. Daniel's phone rang at 7:42 a.m. Victoria's name was on the screen. "I need you to come over," she said. Her voice was even, but underneath the control was something raw and pressurized. "Lily is still asleep. She's watching cartoons. I'll be there in 2 minutes." He crossed the street and knocked. Victoria opened the door in her pajamas, the first time he had ever seen her without the armor of professional clothes. Her hair was messy, and her eyes looked like she had been losing an argument with herself since 4 in the morning. On her kitchen table sat a cream-colored box, tied with a ribbon that had been untied and retied several times. Beside it was a mug of cold coffee and a phone, face down. Daniel sat down across from the box. Victoria sat across from him, Scout already under the table, pressed against her feet. "Ryan signed," she said. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded exhausted. "His lawyer sent the final paperwork Friday night. It's a clean exit. Full ownership of the company reverts to me. It's done." "That's good, Victoria. That's what you wanted." "It is." She looked at the box. "And then I couldn't sleep. I got this out of the closet at 3 this morning. I've been sitting here with it ever since. I didn't want to do this alone." Daniel understood. It was the wedding box, the debris of the life she had, almost built with the wrong person. He waited, letting the silence hold her, until she was ready. She untied the ribbon for the last time. Inside was a stack of ivory, invitations, a set of photos, a folded document of vows, and a small jewelry box. At the bottom was a letter. "I planned it for 2 years," she said, her voice hollow. "Every detail. I was so good at the project that I forgot to ask if I wanted the life. I stayed because leaving felt like failure, because I didn't want him to be the one who told the story of why I broke." She picked up the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. "I wrote this to myself the week I left. I wrote it so I would remember why, for the moments when I tried to convince myself I was being unreasonable. Read it." She pushed the pages toward him. Daniel hesitated, then began to read. It was a brutal accounting of a woman disappearing into someone else's shadow. It was an inventory of every compromise, every swallowed objection, and every morning she had woken up feeling smaller than the day before. Near the end, a single sentence stopped him. "I don't know if I know how to let someone be kind to me without waiting for what it costs." Daniel set the letter down. He looked at her, the real her, unarmored and brave. "Is it still true?" The silence stretched. Scout shifted under the table. "Less," she said finally. "Since July, considerably less." "You don't have to be small here," Daniel said, his voice a low anchor. "Not with me. Not ever. I'm not asking you to be manageable, Victoria. I'm asking you to let me stand next to someone who is full-sized." Victoria's breath caught. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was fierce. "I don't want to make myself smaller again. I won't. I wouldn't let you if you tried." She laughed then, a short, watery sound, and began to pack the box. She didn't put it back in the closet. She set it on the counter, a thing dealt with, no longer stored. "I'm going to shower," she said, standing up. And then I'm going to eat. Stay? Make breakfast. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. The weeks that followed were a blur of making room. Victoria began restructuring her company, bringing in a COO to handle the day-to-day operations. She told Daniel it was for sustainability, but they both knew the truth. She was choosing to live in her life instead of her work. She was making room for farmers markets, for Lily's 40-page manifesto on Ohio State history, and for the man who drank cold coffee at his kitchen window. The final test came from Lily. It was a Saturday morning in November. The three of them were at Victoria's kitchen table. This had become their default. The gravity of the larger table and the better French toast drew them there every weekend. Lily was reading a book. Victoria was on her laptop, and Daniel was simply enjoying the quiet. Lily looked up and asked, without preamble, "Are you guys going to get married?" Victoria's typing stopped. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. "Lily," Daniel said, "we haven't. That's a big question." "I'm just asking," Lily said, her eyes moving between them with clinical precision. "Because I think you should. I've watched you guys from like 2 feet away for a year. You fixed her, she fixed you. What are you waiting for? Are you going to be weird about it for another year?" The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant. Daniel looked at Victoria. She was looking at him, her face unguarded, her jaw set in that way it did when she was feeling something large. Daniel reached into his pocket. He had been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, waiting for a perfect moment that felt as structured as a merger. But looking at his daughter's impatient face and Victoria's honest eyes, he realized the perfect moment was right here, amidst the maple syrup and the Saturday morning sunlight. He set the ring on the table. No speech, no kneeling, just the ring and the man. "Victoria," he said, "I was standing at a window with cold coffee. You told me, if I wanted to look, I should just ask. I'm asking." Victoria looked at the ring. She looked at Lily, who was beaming. Then she looked at Daniel. "Obviously, yes," she said, her voice thick with a laugh. She took the ring and put it on. It was small, clean, and exactly right. She reached across the table and took Lily's hand, then Daniel's. "I'm saying yes to all of it," Victoria said. "To the projects, to the dogs, to the house across the street. All of it." "Finally," Lily muttered, returning to her book with the satisfied air of a successful project manager. The fence gate got fixed the following Wednesday. Not by Daniel, and not by Victoria, but by Lily. She had watched a 12-minute tutorial and bought the hardware herself. She installed the new latch with a focus that Daniel watched from the window with a fullness in his chest he couldn't name. Victoria stood beside him, her shoulder against his. "She's fixing the thing we're both pretending wasn't broken," she remarked. "She has a talent for that." Daniel looked at the gate. It was functional now, clean and bright. But as Lily tested the latch, open, close, open, close, he realized the gate was no longer a barrier. It was a bridge. He wasn't watching from a window anymore. He was here, in the full-sized version of his own life, with a woman who didn't want him to be careful and a daughter who didn't want him to be quiet. They walked outside to inspect the work. The November air was cold, but the house felt warm. On Maple Creek Drive, the ordinary continued. The dogs ran. The fireflies had long since vanished for the winter, and the cold coffee had been replaced by something that actually stayed warm. Daniel took Victoria's hand as they stood by the new latch. They were no longer 2 strangers looking across a street. They were one life, built from the debris of the old ones, and it was beautiful, it was messy, and it was, finally, irreversibly full. The gate was fixed, but their lives remained permanently unlatched to each other. And for Daniel Mercer, that was more than enough. They were learning these small, true facts, the debris of a life that most people swept under the rug. This was the most precarious thing about where they were. The not naming of it gave the relationship room to breathe, but it also left a back door open. Daniel was aware that he did not want the exit. He was also aware that Victoria was carrying a weight she hadn't yet put down, a specific restraint born of being burned by someone who confused love with ownership. Then, Mrs. Huang announced the block party. She announced it with the unmistakable energy of a woman who believed community was a muscle that required regular exercise. Printed flyers were hand-delivered to every door. The word expected was in bold, underlined twice. She means it, Daniel said, standing on Victoria's porch as Scout leaned against his leg. First year I was here, I brought store-bought potato salad. Mrs. Huang thanked me, but she looked at the container for one long, devastating second. I never made that mistake again. Victoria looked at the flyer, a small smile playing on her lips. I'll make something real. I can make a very good peach galette. Lily will lose her mind, Daniel said. I'll make two, Victoria replied, her gaze meeting his. One for the party, and one for Lily. The block party arrived on a Saturday in August. The cul-de-sac was transformed into a sea of folding tables, charcoal smoke, and 90s music. Lily was in her element, arranging decorations with the focused seriousness of a diplomat. Victoria arrived with her galettes, and Daniel watched her navigate the crowd. She was still the general, but the armor was thinner. She listened to Tom Ellison talk about his knee replacement for 20 minutes without checking her phone once. Daniel stood with his friend Marcus, who was observing the scene with a knowing smirk. You need to tell her, Dan, Marcus said, sipping a drink. Tell her what? Come on. You've been careful for 3 years. Responsible, steady, safe. But, at some point, careful just becomes a way of hiding. You're not falling. You've already fallen. You're just managing the landing. Daniel didn't answer because Marcus wasn't wrong. He watched Victoria crouch down to talk to Lily. Lily was showing her a pinwheel, and Victoria's face in. That moment was open, young, and quietly longing. Something moved through Daniel's chest, a slow, certain recognition. He was done being careful. Then, the dark sedan turned into the cul-de-sac. Ryan got out, dressed in weekend casual clothes that were far too intentional. He moved through the party with a practiced social ease that felt like a violation. He found Victoria in seconds. Daniel watched her back go still. He saw the early warning system of her body kick in. Ryan approached her with a smooth, public-facing smile. Just wanted to return some things that are yours. Vic thought a neighborhood party was a nice, low-pressure way to do it. You weren't invited, Victoria said, her voice a flat line. Daniel was moving before he realized it. He didn't run. He just closed the distance until he was standing beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. I heard about the party from a mutual friend, Ryan continued, ignoring Daniel. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it on the food table like a chess piece. The agreement your lawyers sent. I haven't signed it. I wanted to tell you in person that I'm not just going to leave it. Leave it and leave, Ryan, Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but it had the weight of a stone. Ryan turned, his eyes flickering with contempt. You have no idea what you're involved in, Boy Scout. I know she doesn't want you here, Daniel said. That's sufficient. The neighbors had gone quiet. The music still played, but the air was charged. Ryan looked around, realizing he had lost the audience. He couldn't play the concerned ex when the woman was standing with a man who looked like he belonged there. You'll need to sign eventually, Ryan muttered to Victoria. My lawyers will handle it, she replied. Like they've been trying to do for months while you stalled. Ryan left, pulling away with a deliberate slowness. Victoria stared at the envelope on the table. Her hands were at her sides, and they were perfectly still, but her breathing was shallow. The agreement, she said, her voice tight. It's about the company. We were engaged. He invested early on, and now he's claiming partial ownership. He won't sign a clean exit because as long as it's unresolved, he has a reason to contact me. It's not about the money. It's about the door. He doesn't get to have this, Daniel said, gesturing to the street, the party, and the life they were building. He doesn't get to contaminate this. Victoria looked at him, and her eyes were bright. Not with tears, but with a fierce, sudden clarity. Thank you, she whispered. For all of it. She reached out and took his hand. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just her fingers, closing around his, brief and certain. Across the cul-de-sac, Lily was watching. When Daniel's eyes found hers, she very deliberately looked away at the sky, the picture of feigned innocence. Later, when the tables were folded and the street had returned to the quiet of the night, Daniel and Victoria sat on her front step. Lily was dozing on. Daniel's jacket on the grass nearby, Scout curled at her feet. I left him 6 weeks before the wedding, Victoria said suddenly. Everyone thought I was having a breakdown. They all had theories. Nobody considered that. I was the only one who was finally thinking clearly. What made you leave? He told me the company would never have made it without him, she said, her voice hollow. That my success had his fingerprints on it. That I should be grateful. And I realized I had spent 2 years making myself smaller so he could feel larger. I wasn't grateful. I was angry. So I left. Daniel looked at her in the low light. She looked real, tired, and extraordinary. You don't have to be small here, he said. Not with me. Not ever. Victoria looked at him for a long time. The final managed inch of space she had been holding quietly dissolved. Don't hide, Daniel. When it gets real, don't hide. I won't, he promised. If I get difficult. You're already difficult, he said with a small smile. I'm still here. She laughed. A real, surprised laugh that broke the tension of the evening. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in the silence. Dad. Lily's voice came from the grass, sleepy but clear. Yeah, Lil. Finally, she muttered, and then she went back to sleep. Daniel looked at Victoria. She's been waiting for that. We all have, Victoria replied. Across the yard, the fence gate between their houses stood slightly ajar. The latch was still broken, but for the first time, Daniel realized it didn't need fixing. The path was open. The full-sized version of his life was no longer something he was waiting for. It was here, sitting on a porch step in the late summer dark, holding the hand of a woman who had finally stopped looking for the cost of kindness. The shadow was gone. Only the light remained.